Hey folks, and welcome. This video is slightly longer, so we're just going to be going straight into Underrot. Now, the start of Underrot, you can see that we have a fetid maggot, a couple of underlight ticks, and a patrolling matron. Starting with the fetid maggot, it just does a frontal corn, the rotten bile. That's it. It's all you need to worry about. So as a tank, position it into a wall, and you'll then find that this will also be pulled with something like the chosen blood matron. Now, the blood matron herself, she is a huge damage dealer. She hurts, but she also has an ability called Warcry. Now, Warcry, as you can see there, just goes off. It is an enrage effect that increases all damage done by 50%. So it's pretty hefty. However, as you're going to see as we go into one of the future pulls, you'll find that she actually will buff everyone in vicinity. So Warcry is very much a dispel problem, or you want to make sure that you're dealing with the other mobs as quickly as possible if you do have to pull her in a large group. Now, Underrot ticks, they're not too dangerous in and of themselves. However, they do detonate on death, doing some damage to the group. So what you'll find is these become quite scary when you have something like bursting, and the group has already been brought down low because of it. So do bear that in mind. Now, this particular pack with the priest and headhunters, the headhunters themselves aren't particularly scary. They do a hucked snare. They throw a net on you essentially, and you're stuck in place. They also do barbed spear, which is just a thrown ability. Doesn't really do a lot. You can stun these and deal with them in a traditional setting, and you know, everything will be okay. Now, the priest, on the other hand, has a few mechanics that we need to be wary of. You first have the Gift of Gahoon, as you can see by the fanatical headhunter that isn't dead yet. The Gift of Gahoon prevents death. Now, it's a magical buff that can be dispelled, so fell hunters will get a lot of value from this because you can purge it. And purging it then results in death of the mob, or rather, it will then die on its next form of cast. The next thing you have to be wary of, you can see here that Gift of Gahoon is now on 2. This is the problem of casting 2 pets, or pulling 2 priests, sorry. The Dark Reconstitution that you've just seen cast off will then pull them out of death, and Gift of Gahoon still ongoing as well. So these abilities can overlap, which means pulling a double priest pack like I did there is going to be a really bad time unless you're capable of locking the priests down. Now, going into this Befouled Spirit pack, I've summoned my Fell Hunter because I am going to dispel the Befouled Spirit when it gets the Gift of Gahoon cast on. Now, the Befouled Spirit itself will tend to be your kill target here. You'll want to lock the priest down until it's dead, because Dark Omen does a considerable amount of damage at level. It was one of the few things where it was relatively scary. You also see that it did a pulsing AoE there, which is just a kill it quickly as possible. This is kind of a race, because otherwise the Befouled Spirit will muller you all. Dark Reconstitution, there you can demonstrate it as a heal. And then we've got the Gift of Gahoon that I've now dispelled. You may not have been able to see that if you're watching this on something like a phone, but I can assure you it is there, and fell hunters will get value with it if you miss the kick. So don't worry too much about it. Now, headhunters go down, and we end up in a simple situation. We're going to the first boss. You can go down the alternate route, but generally that was avoided. But Elder Lexia, she does not a whole hell of a lot. She has an ability called Blood Mirror, and Blood Bolts, Sanguine Feast. Sanguine Feast you just stay out of. Creeping Rot is a frontal line that you just avoid. You can see that I've just stay in it and watch it traverse. But then the Blood Mirrors, or the Blood Effigies, will replicate her abilities. So for anyone that's done like Kurog Mythic, or any particular fight in that nature, it summons an ad, and the ad then replicates the boss abilities. So it is a priority to kill. This means that generally Elder Lexia will also be your first Bloodlust, regardless whether it's tyrannical or not, because of the fact you have this pseudo-enrage, essentially, tied to her fight space. Because obviously the longer the fight goes on, if you can't deal with the ads, the ads will creep up and it becomes a very unmanageable fight. But all in all, she's very simple. Rotate kicks, call them, make sure you have 1 or 2 people acting as secondary for the blood mirrors, and make use of Curse of Tongues warlocks. And this next pull with a Fetid Maggot and the ticks, again, just position yourself in a way that the frontal cone isn't going to kill the rest of the group, or if you are the rest of the group, let the tank do their thing, mark the tank, and just stay out of their way. The ticks will obviously detonate. Now, these living rots, Wave of Decay, again, just kick it. It does AoE damage, not very nice, and also leaves pools of shit on the floor. Now, aside from that, these mobs aren't anything particularly special. You'll see that I just kind of kite around a little bit and let them just put stuff on the floor. Stay out of it. These mechanics are all very samey. So we're going to actually move forward. Just let those slowly rot down, and we're going to pull the Diseased Lashes. Now, the Diseased Lashes are somewhat more scary because Decaying Mind is a disease, if memory serves, that is going to be a problem. It's going to mind control you, so you need to kick it. You can see here that because I'm doing this solo content, it's having no effect. There's no way to mind control me and still keep the mobs in combat. So, Disease Lasher is going to be your lockdown target. You need 1 person. The disease can be dispelled, but it is a high priority kick, essentially. Moving on to the Feral Blood Swarmers. These Blood Swarmers have 2 main features. The first is Sonic Screech, which is a silence. If you're casting when that thing goes off, you'll be caught out. Much like the Shavara from Court of Stars, the first of the 3 mini-bosses before Talexi. Her Scream of Silence basically works the exact same way. Don't cast as it goes off. You'll see there that I'm Drain Souling to demonstrate. I'm now Shadow Locked. And then the other part of the Feral Blood Swarmer is simply the fact that it will fixate on a target. So stuns, roots, and things like that are your ideal way to deal with them. Now pulling the Lashes and the Wave of Decay, along with a Fetid Maggot. Again, this is a relatively simple pack. Your priority kill target will be the Lasher, and then the Living Rot and the Fetid Maggot will just be dealt with as and when they can, mindful of the cone. Now, this particular pack historically used to be slightly problematic because you have a mix of Diseased Lashes and 2 Feral Blood Swarmers, a Maggot, as well as 2 Living Rots, which means that you're going to be moving around. Now, I'm just placing an ability there because I'm wanting to kill things, but kill them slowly. So I'm actually summoning the Jailkeeper rather than my Inquisitor's Eye. So you can see that it just pulses AoE damage out, which is quite nice. Doesn't do a lot of damage, but it works. But for that particular pack, your AoE stuns and short burst AoE is going to be paramount there. Remember, Lasher dies first, then it's the Swarmers, but do bear in mind that the Swarmers will fixate. So Curse of Exhaustion will be your friend. And then you can hopefully aim the Rotten Bile from the Maggot in a direction so no one gets hit. And then just slowly kite as and when the Living Rots leave their pools on the ground. This pack, very similar. Only difference is there's only the 1 Feral Blood Swarmer that you need to contend yourself with the Decayed Lasher. Relatively easy pack. Nothing to worry about there. Now, Kromag the Infested. This guy does a couple of things. You're going to want to position him near a wall. Traditionally, near this ribcage is generally where you'd pick it. And the reason for that is because he does, his first ability is a frontal cone where he spits out maggots. If you don't run over those maggots, they then turn into these ticks, as you can see on screen. Now, I'm going to deliberately not run over a few and let them detonate. And you can see that one popped off there that I missed. But the blood ticks, again, in and of themselves, they're not dangerous too much, at least at this stage. They become problematic for the healer, though, as the fight progresses, and you're going to see why in a moment. Now, this fight is very much the same old, same old. You can see that another one's about to go off. But then you have Tantrum. Now, Tantrum, Chromag will just run into the middle of the room. There's nothing you can do to stop this. You can't contain him in a corner. But what this means is during Tantrum phases, everyone needs to be on tick duty. Otherwise, you end up in this particular setting, which means that your healers are not going to like you in the slightest. My recommendation for this is when Tantrum goes off, your tank takes any that are near that corner. The rest of the group, using Gateway, Mobility, Demonic Circle, whatever you've got, get out and clear as much of that space as possible before making your way back into that corner with the ribcage. Once you do that, the fight is rinse and repeat and is easy enough. Now, this particular pack with the Death Speaker and the Reanimated Guardians, the Reanimated Guardians can be quite nasty and do leave a dot on the tank, but they can be kited. Or a debuff, rather. The Death Speaker themselves, however, is the problem, because they can buff the party and raise dead. So, what we're going to see is we're going to see a cast Wicked Frenzy. That's a Shadow Fury moment that you need to be wary of, but it buffs all the animated Guardians. Now, Affliction Warlocks, if you're playing this dungeon, bear in mind that if your tank needs to kite those mobs, Vile Taint is a perfect solution, especially when you consider you can amplify Curse and then go into a Vile Taint, which will then mean that every Curse of Exhaustion you apply will in fact be the empowered Curse of Exhaustion. Because the way it works is based off everything hitting at the same time, so it can't differentiate the first target that was hit by Vile Taint if you're applying Curse of Exhaustion to everything. These Grotesque Horrors, Deathbolt cast, just constant death bolts. You're going to need 3 kicks for the rotation. If you don't have 3 kicks to completely lock it out, make use of stuns, horrifies, Dragon's Breath, whatever you need to do. Do not let it get those casts off, but it is a group effort to stop them. The next pack here is just another couple of Reanimated Guardians and a Death Speaker. Not too much really to write home about. We already know how to deal with it, having dealt with it the first pack. Now, this next pull is going to be 2 Bloodsworn Defilers. The Defilers have 2 casts that you need to be wary of, and a Summon Totem as well. Now, the casts that you need to concern yourself with are Shadowburn Volley and Withering Curse. Withering Curse is a damage reduction and a damage taken increase, so not good. Especially when they're both on, say, the tank, for instance. You want to make sure they're kicked. However, you also want to make sure that Shadowbone Volley is kicked. Or Shadowbolt Volley, rather. You then want to avoid standing in the Spirit Drain Totems. These totems essentially just cast and then detonate. You don't bother DPSing them, just stay out of them. If you don't, you will die. But aside from that, these Defilers are fairly simple. When you come up to them, coordinate as a group. You and the tank take one, the other 2 DPS take the other, for example. We then move on to Sporecaller Zencha. Now, for those of you that have never done Underrot, this boss is really easy. Think first boss of Azure Vault. Difference is, rather than spawning ads when things detonate, you'll get a dot on you. So, Shockwave is used to delete these mushrooms. You can also run over them, which will put a disease on you that can be removed by some healers. Alternatively, you also have an ability called Upheaval. Now, Upheaval will launch you into the air with an earthen spike. That earthen spike will also detonate on mushrooms. So what you want to do, as you're about to watch here, I'm going to do it with a single one, just because I don't have a lot of time. Upheaval happens and the mushroom is deleted. What you want to do is make sure that no mushrooms are alive when he goes into this sporal explosion. Otherwise, as I say, you will end up with diseases on you. And it's a group-wide thing, so the entire group will be in trouble, and healers like druids will have to just raw throughput it. Paladins, monks will get away with cleansing it, but obviously you can't do that to the entire group, or if you do, it uses a massive cooldown. The fight itself otherwise is just a rinse and repeat of those mechanics. You can use immunities, but don't worry too much about it. Now, these Faceless Corruptors are a little bit interesting. They have two abilities. They have Abyssal Reach, and they also summon a Tentacle. Oh, sorry. No, Abyssal Reach is summoning the Tentacle. They also have Mindless Gaze. Now, Mindless Gaze is a straight forward line, essentially. Once it starts casting, move out the way. This goes for everybody, otherwise you will be horrified. And the Tentacle, just move out of the way. It's a frontal cone. You can ignore it. Now, again, that worm, Death Bolts, rotation kicks, do not pull two at the same time. Now, this is just a little Warlock gateway that you can make use of if you are over on percent, because you've pulled earlier on in the dungeon, or if you specifically want to skip that Defiler and the two worms to pick up extra trash, like this pack with the Death Speaker and Guardians, because Bone Shield, it's dispellable in terms of the Guardians, and the Death Speaker itself can be killed very, very quickly. Now, those red bubbling areas are worm spawn locations. So if you avoid them and run down the side like I just did, you won't spawn them, you won't have problems. But you can see them well in advance, so you know where they are, should you risk spawning one. Now, Maddening Gaze, you're about to see it cast off. You can see that it just misses me there. And the Faceless Corruptors do stop and cast. Abyssal Reach, both tentacles. You can see they do a frontal cone slam. And then the Maddening Gaze again, just demonstrating how they lock onto a position and then cast. So DPS, do be wary of it. If you're playing as a Warlock or ranged DPS, you can stand on the far side of the wall, and that gives you more than enough time to deal with things if the tank keeps them stacked in one corner. Which brings us on to the final boss, the Abomination. Now, the Abomination is a piece of work. Initially, this fight is going to seem really chaotic and confusing, and it really doesn't help that I am trying to do this at max level and not kill everything. So, starting with the main feature of this boss's health will not deplete. It actually has a secondary resource bar that you are depleting by dealing damage to it. That will then cause it to create adds that can be killed, the blood visages. Now, this second mechanic, the vile explosions, can actually be bounced off walls, which means that it can go forwards. What you want to do is you want to make sure that the boss always casts this in the direction you've come from, in order so that you don't end up filling up the entire fight space with it. So controlled area. So do not do that where it gets launched forwards. You need to make sure you're clear of the boss. As a ranged DPS, this isn't necessarily a problem because you will always be stood further back. But as these rotting spores hit you and you leave stuff on the ground, you will be affected by a debuff. This debuff stacks and will be a healer's job to cleanse. Alternatively, to cleanse it, you can stand in the golden circle that I'm standing in, or that's cast on me, because I'm the only one in here. But what this also does is it also clears the room of any sporelings and the stuff on the ground. So this fight on its face value is a management fight. Because I'm obviously not making sure that the spores are well placed and not killing the spores, we end up in this position where it's spiraling very, very quickly. Every single one of those grey patches on the floor will summon spores. Eventually you get to the point where these blood visages spawn. There's 6 in total that you need to kill throughout the course of the fight, because you basically do 2 repetitions of this. And by killing the visages, the Abomination loses a drastic amount of health, reducing, essentially, ending and killing the boss. So after your 6th visage, just turn around, nuke it, and it becomes a race against time, especially when you get this last wave in, because as you can see, it spawns in sets of 3. So when you get the second wave, just burn very, very quickly and very, very easily. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video. Underrot's been a little bit more challenging to do, but I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.